Okay, so we can do a short reflection on the Dhamma. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. So I've got the microphone here today to give me a bit of a backup. And another Tuesday night here, so it was a nice week this week. I think this week was my mother's birthday, and also Shriyani had a birthday in December. When was your birthday, Shriyani? 14th. The 14th. Oh, hers the 16th. Very close. Good month. And then Christmas is soon too. So a lot of good things this month. And also this week, I actually got sick, kind of this, so we had a birthday, and then this last weekend I got sick. And then today, somebody came to talk to me because her mother died. So then we had a birthday, and we had a sickness, and also we had a death. So. And so this is the kind of way that things go in the world. Often these days in the West, was talking to this particular person, and we were talking about how people actually pass away all the time. Kind of people get sick all the time, but we don't see that kind of in the West. That kind of it's kind of hidden. We often don't know somebody has passed away. I remember my friend. He was my third grade public school teacher, and still we're in touch, and have a lot of gratitude towards him. He's a really good teacher, and he lived with the natives in northern Ontario for a long time. And he said that in that community was really tight, maybe like 200 people in this town, and the town was surrounded by wilderness. The only way to get to other places was by plane or through wilderness tracks, using Sidhu or whatever it is. And whenever somebody was about to die, then the whole kind of community would come in and kind of stream by this person, and kind of always be coming in. People would always be coming around this person who was dying. And then at the time that the person died, they were always just surrounded by people. This whole community would come. And then they would have rituals, kind of feasts, things like this, around this kind of thing. And of course, then when somebody was sick, everybody would know. They would know that that people had gotten sick. And they would be there, to try to help. And when somebody was born, people would know, right? Because there's a new person, and then the whole kind of village would be available, would be around to know that this kind of new person had been born. And often they would have these kind of interesting ceremonies as a side. If you hadn't been born there, but you'd stayed there for a long time, then sometimes a family would just adopt you. So you'd just be in this kind of community. And he said he was in this community, and then one day there was this feast, and he didn't know what was going on. He came to the feast, and it turned out the feast was about him. So this whole community was there. He didn't know. And then this one man said to him, "Okay, I'm adopting you. So now you're part of our family. So from this day forward, you're to refer to me as father, and I will refer to you as son. So now you're my son." So in other words, they would adopt him. So if you hadn't been born there, you were kind of officially adopted into the family. And one of the things about this kind of system, kind of where all these things were out in the open, is that it made the fact that they happened like a lot more obvious. It kind of made the fact people were born, these kind of good times. It made the fact that people got sick. Okay, there's these kind of bad times. It made the fact that people died. Okay, this is also an inevitable time. These are all kind of facts of life. Facts that were impossible to escape, and facts that had a larger context. Often in these kind of communities, even in the West in former times, being born, getting sick, getting old, dying, all these things had a context that was apart from just our body, right? Apart from just our brain. There was more to being born than just a new brain, just new neurons, just new muscles and tendons, More to growing old than just these things decaying a little bit, More to getting sick than just bacteria or viruses kind of coming in, invading, and, plugging themselves in and making new viruses. And more to dying than just brain death, All these things had a meaning in a larger kind of context. In other words, there was a meaning to them. There was a reason that people were born, a reason people get sick, reasons people get old, and reasons that people die. Now, these kind of larger contexts to these are things that are kind of important, because a larger context to these things serves as a refuge. Now, in the West, this refuge at one point kind of got partially abandoned. And it was because people felt like this refuge was a lie. It's kind of that basically all there was the material world. That there was nothing apart from the material world. That our minds were entirely in our brains. That the best possibility that we had for happiness was strictly in getting more and more external sensual pleasures. And eventually, most religion in the West got kind of abandoned on this kind of model. Kind of the traditional religions. Partially people felt that they'd been maybe lied to. Kind of that science was disproving some of the things that were in these traditional religions. But the thing about this is that nowadays, as time goes on, and you had generations, they grew up with these kind of larger contexts for their life. But that fades away as the institution goes. In one generation, 2 generations, 3 generations down the line, if it's totally gone, then people just grow up with this desire for external material things. Purpose of their life is external material things. The purpose of being born is random. The purpose of growing old is also somewhat random. It's part of the laws of nature. And dying as well is also random. And the entire context for these things is to get various types of external pleasures in the meantime. Now, there is a kind of rationale to this. It's not like a totally terrible theory. We have just a kind of totally world-denying attitude, like, okay, there's no point in enjoying anything. Actually, there's a lot of kind of nice things in the world. You kind of know, no question. And the Buddha talks about this. People have wealth. There's this kind of thing called the pleasure of enjoyment that people are supposed to have. In other words, you don't just have a wealth and then store it away and never enjoy it at all. If you've got wealth, then you can go on trips. You can do various things. If you have a car, you can drive it. And it's not like there's anything particularly evil about doing that. Not like there's anything particularly bad, in these things in and of themselves. And so there is this kind of thing. It is true that there are these kind of pleasant things, and there's this kind of gratification to these things. This is the gratification, that there are pleasant, sensual, external experiences. There are pleasant things in the fast cars, the houses, and tasty food, and all these various things. And to be sure, it's to be enjoyed at certain times if people have them. This is the Buddha's instruction on some of the happinesses that somebody can gain living in the household life. But in addition to these things, this kind of gratification, there's also a danger to these things. So actually this weekend, I was going for Dana in Oshawa, and I came back on kind of Saturday. I felt myself kind of getting a little bit sicker. And I came back on Saturday, I was just kind of totally floored, one of these kind of sicknesses where you lay down and basically every move you make is just sneezing. You ever go to move, you're kind of sneezing, and then getting more and more sneezing, and you basically can't move much at all. And so you're just kind of lying there. And, again, went for Dana the following day and kind of pulled myself out of bed. And then that day, on I think it was Sunday or something like that, I went to lay down. I was just kind of very sick. I kind of just had this fever and then got really weak. I just couldn't basically even, I remember I had this kind of one cat that got sick, and I went to pet him. And when he got sicker, you could feel that he didn't have any strength in his neck. He would just kind of rest his head, on your hand, and kind of could see that, that day, that basically all the strength was gone. I just didn't, even just kind of lying down, I didn't have much strength to hold my head up. Kind of, at that point, you're kind of, not like I was dying or anything, but, to move is basically mostly mental energy. It's not like you have this kind of excess physical energy. And this kind of fever and sickness, and just kind of lying down there. And being sick like that as well, you don't get good sleep, basically, if you don't take drugs. And every 2 or 3 hours, you just wake up, and your body's in this kind of physical pain. Now, if we have this kind of thing happen, this kind of a sickness happen to us, then there's one or two things that can happen. If all that we have is external sensual pleasures, then our mind has this habit of rushing out to those things. And so in the same way, it rushes to the eye, rushes to the ear, rushes to the nose, rushes to the tongue, rushes to the body to find things that are pleasant. When things that are painful come up, it rushes to them. Painful feelings in the chest come, it rushes to the chest. Painful feelings in the lungs come, it rushes to the lungs. Painful feelings in the body come, it rushes to the body. And in that way, a sickness that's just a sickness can leave a person feeling really miserable. So the Buddha gives a teaching on this. He says it's like people who get shot by an arrow. So in other words, it's like being in physical pain. That's like getting shot by one arrow. But then there's also this other arrow that people can turn around and shoot themselves with. This kind of mental arrow. In other words, this thing like sickness happens. It's something we can't avoid. There's this physical part to it that's not avoidable. Kind of even the Buddha felt physical pain. But there's this other part of it. There's this mental arrow, the second part, which is actually often more painful and can compound the physical pain, which is basically the way that we pay attention to these things, the way we send our mind out to them. And the context, the larger picture that we hold these things in, determines a lot about how much we're going to get shot by this second arrow, this mental arrow. So in other words, knowing, my body is subject to sickness. This is kind of one of the things that there's actually meditations on these kind of things that the Buddha instructs to do often. We don't often go through these guided meditations in here, and they're not often taught in the West. But these types of meditations on the loathsomeness of the body, meditations on impermanence in all things, you don't teach them right away in the West because they can seem depressing. But what they actually are is they're a protection. When we have these kind of perceptions well established, look, this body, I think it's mine, but it isn't. This body does what I say sometimes, but the day will come when I'll want the body to do something, and I want to get up, I want to go, but I can't. Kind of, just there, coughing or whatever it is, The day will come when that happens. Reflecting on this often, bringing this up often, it brings a remove between our mind and our body, between our senses and our body. And this comes in real handy when these kind of things happen to us. You know? When sickness happens to us, we know this body isn't mine. And instead of our mind rushing out to grab onto the body, to grab on to its usual refuge in trying to find pleasant things, instead it stays back. It can remain calm. You know? It has another thing to focus on. You know? This is the benefit of having meditation as our basis. Even when our body is sick, our mind doesn't have to become sick. You know? Even when we grow old, our mind, our practice doesn't necessarily have to grow old. You know? And even when we die, the good karma, the momentum of the good things that we've done, that doesn't die with our physical body. You know? So knowing all these things in a larger context, that gives a different meaning to our life. You know? Gives a meaning to our life that goes beyond just trying to get more stuff, more houses or more cars. Gives a meaning to our life that goes beyond trying to find new experiences, going on new trips, having new friends, seeing the new movie, going to new places we haven't been to. It gives a meaning to our life that goes even beyond the people in our life. Having the people that we love around us, having them behave towards us in ways that we like, having success in our job, even having all these various things. We reflect on these things often. All these things are subject to change. It turns our mind back to try to find a refuge within ourselves. Yeah? And this is the Buddha's true instruction to us. To try to learn to become an island to ourselves. To try to learn to become a refuge to ourselves. A refuge that floods can't overwhelm. Yeah? Because so long as all we have are external things, things that are external to us, when they change, that we suffer. And we suffer from that. It sounds like a simple thing to say, but the reality of it is when we have this context in our mind, the next time we get sick, then we can see the truth of it. That's where the truth really is. It's easy to say it in a statement, when things change, we suffer. But when we see that, look, I'm sick, how do I get myself out of this suffering? That's where we really learn where our meditation practice comes in handy. Can our mind separate from that? Does our mind have something else to focus on even when our body isn't well? And so when we cultivate these things, we cultivate this larger context. We know there's a larger context. The aims of our life shift. They shift away from just having the things we like to a purpose, to a higher purpose. I want to develop my mind. I want to develop my practice so that I can try to find a true refuge from the things that cause me to suffer. And when we have this kind of higher aim in mind, this higher purpose in our mind, it takes our life on a different trajectory. Of course, we still encounter the things that are pleasant. We still encounter the things that are painful. All the things that people normally encounter in life, we still encounter. But the question stops being, how can I consume these things? And changes to, how can I use these things to train my mind? How can I use them to move forward on the Buddha's path of practice? And so the true benefit of this can be seen. It's to be seen by one for themselves. It's to be seen by a person whose mind used to rush out when they got sick, and now when they're sick, they remain equanimous. They can still meditate when they're sick. It's to be seen by a person whose mind used to rush out when people they cared about didn't behave in ways that they like, and now when people they cared about don't behave in ways that they like, even when they pass away, their mind is able to cope with that. Their mind has perceptions that they've cultivated in the face of that. Their mind has a refuge in the face of that. And ultimately, and most important, even though it's not now like the native communities where this is always present, this kind of thing, okay, people die, When the time comes for us, that all these various things start to fall away. When a person gets old, everything falls away from them. The older a person gets, their health starts to fall away, their faculties start to fall away. Sometimes when you see people, they're in their 90s, even they don't seem like they belong to the time anymore. Like they're in a different era, part of a different time, you know? Even that kind of time, like your feeling of belonging starts to fall away. You know? Belonging even in the world. You know? It's kind of like, well, nobody I know is around here. When all these things fall away, we need to have something that doesn't fall away. We need to have this kind of momentum of our practice. We need to have these wholesome and good actions that we've been building throughout our life. And we need to have this desire to train our mind right up to the moment that we pass. Because this desire is what builds a refuge for us. This desire is what allows us to find a safe place in our own mind. A place that's there with us, a practice that's there with us, even when things are born, when they get sick, when they get old, when they die. These wholesome qualities, this practice doesn't have to leave us. And ultimately, in the end, our aim is to transcend all these qualities even in and of themselves, to find something that doesn't die at all. And that just there is the end of suffering. Okay, so I think I'll leave that for reflection. And are there any questions? Questions today? Well, my voice is really small without the microphone, eh? It's very easy to talk with this. You don't have to raise your voice at all, you know? But actually my voice is feeling all right. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes, like in this new generation, compared to us, like our grandchildren, they, like you said, that they are always looking for fun outside all the time. Like more material things, going out, not spending time with the family, so always looking fun for outside somewhere. How to make them content? Like not always, because they are always fidgeted, doing something new and fun like things.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what they do, they don't feel content. They always like, they don't have that serenity in them anymore.
Yes, I mean, it's tricky because you can't really force.
Yeah, we can't, but I mean, sometimes it's kind of disturbing when you see them like they're wasting their energy for things which is not worthwhile.
Yes, I get...
It's difficult to communicate with the new generation because it's when we was young, like our parent and between us is just one generation gap. Like, but now because of the technology, information, the generation gap between parents and children are a kind of centuries gap, not just one generation gap. So sometimes it's difficult to communicate and tell them that don't be so obsessed with the fun all the time.
Yeah. So I mean, a person can try all the usual things that parents try. And
No, I can convey what I want to ask, but
yeah, so it's tricky. That's the thing, right? Is that there's things that parents can try, raising their kids, but ultimately kids and generations have their own karma.
yeah.
So it's at the end of the day, they have a choice, right? They have all the tools that are provided to them by their parents and grandparents, but if they choose not to use them, there's nothing we can do. So that's why we cultivate, in addition to cultivating this loving kindness, this desire that everybody be well, we also cultivate equanimity. You know? So in other words, when there's things that we can change for the better, then we change them. But when there's a time that comes when trying to change things causes problems, or there's things we can't change, then we leave them alone. We try to change ourselves.